There's a certain kind of peace you only find at the edge of a lake, where the water laps gently against the shore and the world seems to slow down just enough for you to catch your breath. That's why I bought the property in the first place. A little slice of heaven tucked away from the noise and rush of the city, a place where I could fish, camp, and watch the sun rise over the water without a care in the world. The cabin was nothing fancy, just a sturdy log structure with a wide porch and a couple of Adirondack chairs. But it was mine, paid for with years of hard work, and a dream of weekends spent in quiet solitude. I'd never had any trouble with the neighbors, most of whom kept to themselves or waved politely as they passed by on their boats. But there was one exception. The self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, a woman everyone called Karen behind her back, though her real name was something far less memorable. She had a way of making her presence known, whether it was by patrolling the shoreline with a clipboard or sending out lengthy emails about community standards and bylaw compliance. I'd always try to stay on her good side, nodding and smiling when she stopped by to remind me about the proper way to store firewood or the importance of keeping my grass trimmed to exactly 3 inches. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she found something to complain about. That time came on a Friday evening in late spring, when I decided to pitch a tent by the water's edge and spend the night under the stars. I brought my fishing rod, a cooler full of snacks, and a stack of old paperbacks, planning to do nothing more than relax and enjoy the quiet. The air was warm, the sky clear, and the only sound were the calls of loons and the distant hum of a motorboat. I just settled into my chair with a cold drink when I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel on the driveway. I looked up to see Karen marching toward me, her face set in a look of grim determination, her phone already in hand. "Excuse me," she called, her voice carrying across the water. "What do you think you're doing?" I set my drink down and stood, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Just camping for the night, Karen. It's my property." She shook her head, waving her clipboard like a badge of authority. "You can't camp here. It's against the HOA bylaws. No tents, no fires, no overnight stays outside the cabin. I've told you before, this is a residential community, not a campground." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "I've read the bylaws, Karen. They say no permanent campsites, no commercial camping. I'm just spending the night on my own land." She scowled, tapping furiously on her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're in violation, and I won't have you setting a bad example for the rest of the neighborhood." I watched as she dialed 911, her voice rising as she explained the emergency to the dispatcher. I couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was I about to be arrested for camping on my own property? Within 20 minutes, the wail of sirens broke the evening calm, and 2 police cruisers pulled up at the end of the drive. The officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, their expressions a mix of boredom and mild annoyance. Karen rushed to meet them, launching into a breathless account of my flagrant disregard for community rules and the danger I pose to the neighborhood. The officers listened politely, then turned to me. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on?" I explained, showing them my deed, the bylaws, and the tent I'd set up by the water. "I'm not running a business, not disturbing anyone, just enjoying a night by the lake." The older officer nodded, glancing at Karen. "Ma'am, unless there's a real emergency or a clear violation of the law, there's not much we can do." Karen sputtered, insisting that I was ruining the community and inviting trouble, but the officers remained unmoved. They checked my ID, made a few notes, and finally told Karen that she needed to take it up with the HOA board if she had further concerns. As the cruisers pulled away, Karen shot me a look of pure venom. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming off down the drive. I watched her go, a strange mix of relief and sadness settling over me. I'd won this round, but I knew it was only the beginning. That night, as I lay in my tent listening to the sound of the lake, I wondered what it would take for people like Karen to understand that sometimes the best thing you can do for a community is to let people live and let them be. The next morning, the lake was shrouded in a gentle mist, the kind that makes the world feel new and untouched. I brewed coffee over a small camp stove, savoring the quiet and the view, but the peace was tinged with a sense of unease. I knew Karen well enough to realize she wouldn't let things go. Sure enough, As the sun burned off the fog and the first boats began to glide across the water, I heard the familiar sound of her voice drifting from the road. She was talking to a couple of neighbors, her words clipped and urgent, her gestures animated. I could only imagine the story she was spinning, how I defied authority, how the police had been forced to intervene, how the sanctity of the community was at risk because I dared to sleep under the stars. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the simple pleasures of the morning. The tug of fish on a line, the warmth of the sun on my face, the slow, easy rhythm of a day with nothing to do but enjoy my own land. But as the hours passed, it became clear that Karen's campaign was gaining traction. By lunchtime, I received 3 emails from the HOA board, each more formal than the last, reminding me of the importance of compliance and warning that further violations may result in fines or legal action. I replied to each one, attaching photos of the bylaws and pointing out that I was well within my rights. I even offered to meet with the board to discuss the issue, hoping that a face-to-face conversation might defuse the tension. But the responses were cold and bureaucratic, full of legal jargon and veiled threats. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the lake, hoping to clear my head. As I strolled along the shoreline, I ran into a few neighbors, some friendly, some cautious, all curious. One older couple, the Martins, stopped to chat. "We heard about what happened last night," Mrs. Martin said, her voice low. "Don't let her get to you. We've had our own run-ins with Karen. She means well, but she doesn't know when to stop." Mr. Martin nodded, his eyes twinkling. This place used to be a lot more relaxed before the HOA got so involved. We used to have bonfires, campouts, even a little bluegrass festival every summer. Now it's all rules and regulations. Their words gave me hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I felt. Maybe there were others who missed the old spirit of the lake, who wanted a community built on trust and respect, not fear and control. I thanked them and continued my walk, feeling a little lighter. But when I returned to my property, I found a new notice taped to my cabin door, a formal citation from the HOA, citing me for unauthorized camping and threatening a $500 fine if I didn't cease and desist immediately. I stared at the paper, anger and disbelief warring inside me. I knew I had to make a choice. Back down and let Karen and the HOA set the rules for my life, or stand up and fight for my right to enjoy my own land. That evening, I sat on the porch with my laptop, drafting a letter to the entire HOA membership. I told my side of the story, how I bought the property to find peace, how I followed the rules, how I'd been harassed for doing nothing more than enjoying the outdoors. I asked my neighbors to remember what had drawn them to the lake in the first place, and to consider whether the HOA's heavy-handed tactics were really making the community better. I hit send and watched the sun set, feeling a mix of anxiety and resolve. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't let fear or intimidation win. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made a promise to myself. I would stand my ground, not just for me, but for everyone who believed that a home by the lake should be a place of freedom, not a fortress of rules. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and unexpected support. My email to the HOA membership had struck a nerve. By the next morning, my inbox was overflowing with replies. Some were curt and unsympathetic, echoing Karen's warnings about community standards and the slippery slope of letting one person bend the rules. But many more were thoughtful, even apologetic, from neighbors who remember the lake as a place of freedom and fun, not just a collection of properties policed by bylaws. A few share their own stories. A family who'd been scolded for letting their kids roast marshmallows by the water, a retired couple who'd been fined for hanging a hammock between 2 trees, a group of friends who'd been told to take down their string lights after a single complaint. The more I read, the more I realized that Karen's crusade wasn't just about me. It was about a culture of control that had crept in over the years, slowly squeezing the joy out of lake life. I decided to take the next step. I called for a community meeting, inviting everyone to gather at the old picnic pavilion by the water on Saturday afternoon. I promised coffee, cookies, and an open conversation about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to be. The HOA board tried to discourage the meeting, sending out a terse reminder that all gatherings must be pre-approved. But the response from residents was overwhelming. When Saturday arrived, The pavilion was packed. People brought lawn chairs, coolers, and homemade treats. Some came out of curiosity, others out of frustration, but all came with stories to share. I stood up and spoke first, telling my story plainly, no drama, just the facts. I explained how I'd been cited for camping on my own land, how the police had been called, how the bylaws were being used as a weapon instead of a guide. Then I invited others to speak. One by one, neighbors stood and shared their experiences. Some were angry, some were sad, but all were tired of living in fear of the next violation notice. The Martins talked about the Lost Bluegrass Festival. A young mom described how her kids missed sleeping in a tent by the water, and even a few former board members admitted that things had gone too far. The conversation was honest, sometimes heated, but always respectful. By the end of the afternoon, it was clear that the community wanted change. We agreed to form a committee to review the bylaws, to make sure they reflected the values of the people who actually lived at the lake. We also decided to petition the board to suspend enforcement of the most restrictive rules until the review was complete. That night, as I sat by the fire pit with a few new friends, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. The lake was quiet, the stars bright, and for the first time since Karen had called 911, I felt like I belonged again. The next morning, the committee got to work. We pored over the bylaws, highlighting the most controversial sections and researching how other communities handled similar issues. We reached out to the board, inviting them to join the process, and to my surprise, a few accepted. Even Karen showed up to one meeting, though she mostly listened in stony silence. The process wasn't easy. There were arguments, compromises, and more than a few late nights. But slowly, we began to find common ground. We agreed that safety and respect mattered, but so did freedom and fun. We drafted new language that allowed for camping, bonfires, and small gatherings, as long as they didn't disturb the peace or damage the land. We proposed a new system for handling complaints, one that focused on mediation and conversation instead of fines and threats. When the revised bylaws were finally ready, we held a vote. The turnout was huge, and the new rules passed by a wide margin. The board, perhaps sensing the shift in the community, accepted the changes with little protest. Karen, for her part, seemed to retreat, her influence waning as neighbors found their voices. The lake felt different after that, more open, more welcoming, more like the place I dreamed of when I first bought my property. I still saw Karen from time to time, patrolling the shoreline with her clipboard, but now she was just another neighbor, not a force to be feared. And as I pitched my tent by the water one last time that summer, I realized that the real victory wasn't in winning an argument or avoiding a fine. It was in helping the community remember what it meant to live free together by the lake. As summer faded into fall, the changes at the lake became more than just words on paper. They became a new way of living. The revised bylaws brought a sense of relief and possibility, and neighbors who had once kept to themselves now greeted each other with easy smiles and invitations to join in lakeside cookouts or impromptu fishing contests. The old spirit of the lake, the one the Martins and so many others remembered, returned in full force. On weekends, families pitched tents along the shore. Children roasted marshmallows over small, carefully tended fires, and laughter echoed across the water long after sunset. The Bluegrass Festival was revived, drawing musicians and neighbors from all around. And for the first time in years, the lake felt like a true community, a place where people looked out for each other, not over their shoulders. I found myself at the center of it all, not because I wanted to be, but because I refused to back down when it mattered. People stopped by my cabin to thank me, to share their own stories, or just to sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the water. Even Karen, who had once seemed so determined to control every detail of lake life, changed in small but meaningful ways. She still carried her clipboard, but now she used it to organize cleanup days and coordinate potlucks, her tone softer, her smile more genuine. One afternoon, as I was fishing off the dock, she approached quietly and sat beside me. For a long moment, we just watched the ripples on the lake. "I suppose I got carried away," she said finally, her voice low. "I thought I was protecting something important, but maybe I was just afraid of losing control." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. We all want to protect what we love. Sometimes we just forget that the best way to do that is to trust each other. She smiled, and for the first time, I saw not the HOA enforcer, but a neighbor who cared deeply about the place we both called home. As the leaves turned and the air grew crisp, the lake community continued to thrive. The new complaint process worked. Disagreements were handled with conversation, not confrontation, and people felt heard instead of threatened. The board, once distant and rigid, became more approachable, holding regular open forums and encouraging everyone to participate. The Martins hosted the first bonfire of the season, and as we all gathered around the flames, sharing stories and music, I realized how much had changed. The fear and suspicion that had once hung over the lake were gone, replaced by a sense of belonging and pride. I thought back to that first night, when Karen had called 911, and I'd wondered if I'd ever feel at home again. Now, as I looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. The lake was more than just a piece of property. It was a community, a family, a place where freedom and respect went hand in hand. And as the stars came out and the music drifted across the water, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that we had all, in our own way, helped to build something lasting and good.